and welcome to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio, researched and written by Adrian Peterson in Indianapolis, and produced in the studios of WRMI Shortwave in Miami. I'm Jeff White. Today on Wavescan, we have the BBC Indian Ocean relay stations, 5 in a row, on the air on shortwave from India's first capital city. Part 1, the Calcutta story. And the burning question that's on all shortwave listeners' minds, what is a kilohertz? Well, some time ago, the BBC announced that they plan to close their Indian Ocean relay station at the end of the month, Saturday, March 29th. The station has been on the air for more than a quarter century, and it will end its international shortwave service, though the local FM relay stations will still remain on the air. As a tribute to the lengthy service provided from this important radio station, we're planning to present 2 topics here in Wavescan. Next week, you'll hear the story of the BBC Indian Ocean relay station, and this week we present the story 5 in a row, the steps leading up to the erection of their relay station in the Seychelles Islands. Here now is KVOH's Ray Robinson.
Thanks, Jeff. Back at the end of last year, we presented the story of the temporary BBC relay station located at Francistown in Botswana, Africa. This station was hurriedly pieced together in an effort to counter the political events in neighbouring Rhodesia, and it was officially identified as the BBC Central Africa relay station. 4 transmitters were installed, 2 medium-wave Continentals at 50 kilowatts each from the United States, and 2 short-wave Marconis at 10 kilowatts each from England. This station was taken into service on December the 30th, 1965, and its last day of on-air service was March 31st, 1968. Around the time when the station was closing, a question was raised in the British Parliament in London regarding the BBC Central Africa relay station. According to the Hansard report, it was stated that the Francistown station was closing and that additional antenna systems were under installation at the BBC relay station on Ascension Island. These new antennas would ensure, it was stated, adequate shortwave coverage into Rhodesia. But this, of course, would form only a temporary interim service into Rhodesia. In the meantime, in June 1966, it was announced that the BBC was investigating the possibility of utilising a large ship as a BBC relay station for radio coverage into East Africa. The ship they were looking at was a redundant aircraft carrier, HMS Leviathan. The good ship Leviathan had been laid down at Tyneside in England on October the 18th, 1943, as an aircraft carrier for use in the latter part of World War II. This ship was launched on June 7th, 1945, just as World War II was coming to an end, but it was never fully completed and simply lay around awaiting its destiny. At the time when the BBC was investigating the possibility of taking over the ship as a relay broadcasting station, the suggestion was to have it stationed in the Mozambique Channel and that it would give radio coverage into Rhodesia and South Africa on behalf of the BBC. At the time, the former British colony of Rhodesia had made a unilateral declaration of independence, or UDI, and the South African government was a strong supporter of Ian Smith's administration in Rhodesia. It does seem at least mildly hypocritical that all this was going on at the same time as the BBC was complaining back home about the existence of unlicensed offshore stations on ships and forts around the British Isles. It's probable that the mobile shipboard radio station on the Leviathan would have transmitted on medium wave towards East Africa, though shortwave could later have been considered. However, this radio project never materialised and the entire concept was scrapped. 2 years later, the empty and uncompleted aircraft carrier Leviathan itself was sold and scrapped. However, around the same time, the BBC was also investigating the possibility of establishing a large relay station on the island of Aldabra for broadcast into East Africa. Aldabra is a tiny uninhabited atoll 500 miles off the coast of Africa, 300 miles north of Madagascar, and 500 miles from Zanzibar. The only personnel on the island are a few officials, caretakers, and research officers. The Aldabra Atoll is 21 miles long, 8 miles wide, and it's the second largest raised coral reef in the world. This atoll is made up of 4 small islets around a shallow lagoon, but there's no fresh water available. There are many unique forms of life in the area, including an estimated 100,000 giant tortoises. Back in 1966, the Royal Air Force was giving consideration to establishing an airbase on Aldabra, and the American Air Force was interested in a joint collaboration with the RAF as a refueling station for American planes en route to Vietnam. American investment in the project would amount to $11 million. In 1966, the BBC chartered a 600-ton coastal vessel from Mombasa, the Southern Skies, for a 6-week exploratory expedition to Aldabra. The BBC survey party was in contact with London via a shortwave SSB transmitter on the ship, and the BBC communicated back to the ship via one of the high-powered shortwave transmitters at Daventry. However, due to the incursion of Tropical Storm Angela, the survey expedition to Aldabra was cut short, and this project too was abandoned. If the Aldabra project had materialised, it was envisioned that 4 high-powered medium-wave transmitters at 750 kilowatts each would have been installed with 4 independent directional antenna systems beamed westwards towards Africa. These transmitters would be operated separately, or in pairs, or all with combined power on a single medium-wave channel. Though not stated, if this station had been installed, it is probable that shortwave coverage would have been added subsequently. However, the British and American Air Force Base never became a reality, so neither did the BBC relay station. The next project in this sequence was the BBC relay station in the Seychelles Islands, and that, of course, is our opening topic in Wavescan next week. So what then were the 5 in a row? Here's the list. First was the temporary BBC relay station at Francistown in Botswana, which operated from 1965 to 1968. Second was the installation of an antenna system at the BBC relay station on Ascension Island for coverage into Rhodesia on shortwave, which was operational from 1968. Third was consideration of HMS Leviathan for possible use as a relay station in the Mozambique Channel in 1966. Fourth was the projected BBC station on the island of Aldabra, also in 1966. And finally, fifth was the BBC Indian Ocean relay station on the Seychelles, which has operated from 1988 to 2014.
You're listening to Wavescan from Adventist World Radio. Send your comments and reception reports to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana 46229 in the United States. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana 46229 in the USA. Or you can email us at wavescan@awr.org. Our email once again, wavescan@awr.org.
Wavescan presents Focus on Asia, a year-long series of reports about shortwave broadcasting and listening on the continent of Asia. Well, quite recently, Jose Jacob VU2JOS in Hyderabad, India, sent us an email message in which he alerted us regarding the possible closure of VUC, the current shortwave station in Kolkata. He stated that the shortwave transmitter at Kolkata was scheduled to close down on February 22nd, as per orders from the headquarters of All India Radio in Delhi. However, the Technical Employees Union in Kolkata protested this decision, and so the shortwave station still remains on the air, though for how much longer is uncertain. Two matters arise out of this information. If you do not yet have QSLs verifying the Indian regional shortwave stations, you should send reception reports to them while they are still on the air. It is known that all of these analog shortwave transmitters in India will one day be closed in favor of digital transmitters. And number 2, as Jose Jacob suggested, now would be an appropriate time to present a complete station profile on AIR Calcutta. So, here we go. The city of Calcutta is located on the east bank of the Hooghly River, a branch of the Ganges River in the Delta area, some 60 miles inland from the Bay of Bengal. Back in the area before the arrival of the British, there were just 3 small villages in the area. Kolikata, a small fishing village, Sutanuti, a small weaving village, and Govindapur. The British East India Company was established in the area in 1690, and they bought the areas embracing the 3 villages, and thus the name Kolikata became the name for what became the entire city. In its anglicized version, Kolikata became the very familiar Calcutta. Several different origins have been suggested for the original meaning of the name Calcutta, and it would appear that the most logical would be that Kolikata, in the early Bengali language, meant the field of the goddess Kali. In the days of strife between the colonial British and the local Bengali people, Calcutta became notorious for what it called the Black Hole of Calcutta, a small prison in which many prisoners died overnight some 2.5 centuries ago. In 1773, Calcutta became the national capital of all India, a title that it held for more than 1.25 centuries. Delhi became the national capital in 1911. India's first newspaper, the Bengal Gazette, was printed in Calcutta in 1780. The first Christian missionary, William Carey, arrived in Calcutta in 1793. Calcutta was the second largest city in the British Empire in the year 1900, with London as the largest. The national anthems for both India and Bangladesh were composed in Calcutta by the Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore. The city name was changed from the English Calcutta to the Bengali Kolkata in 2001. The port of Kolkata stretches for 20 miles on both sides of the river. These days, 14.1 million people live in Greater Kolkata, the 3rd largest city in India. Among the many tourist attractions in Kolkata are the ornate Victoria Memorial that was designed in the style of the Taj Mahal, the city zoo, in which successful crossbreeding between tigers and lions has been achieved, and the huge banyan tree, more than 250 years old and covering more than 4 acres. Most of the early wireless experiments in India took place in the Calcutta area, and it was back in the year 1849, more than 1.5 centuries ago, that the first wireless experiments were undertaken by Dr. Sir William Shaughnessy, Superintendent of Telegraphs. He successfully transmitted wireless signals across the Hooghly River, 3/4 of a mile wide, with a wire along each bank of the River Hooghly and a metal plate at the end of each wire immersed in the water. It seems that each succeeding electrician in Calcutta conducted similar experiments, and next came Mr. Blissett. In 1858, he conducted similar wireless experiments with the use of a long wire on each bank of a river, and in this way achieved fair success. Mr. Winter followed, and he made some astute observations regarding cross-modulation of Morse signals between parallel telegraph wires on the same poles in 1873. 3 years later, Mr. Schwendler carried out similar cross-river communications across the River Hooghly at Barakpur, near Calcutta, using parallel wires with metal plates submerged in the water. Mr. W.P. Johnston was next, and he repeated the same experiments across a nearby waterway 200 yards wide on September 9, 1879. 9 years later, he carried out many similar experiments across nearby canals in the Calcutta area and also across the River Hooghly itself. Mr. Melhush was next, and he discovered that the wires lying on the bank of each side of the river need to be at least as long as the river is wide in order to achieve reliable communication. The first experimental work on the transmission and reception of radio signals in India was carried out by Dr. Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose. Towards the end of the year 1894, Bose began his experimentation with wireless, and in November 1895, he gave a public demonstration in the Calcutta Town Hall with Bengal's Lieutenant Governor, Sir William Mackenzie, in attendance. In this public demonstration, Bose transmitted wireless signals at a wavelength of just 1/2 inch over a distance of 75 feet through several solid walls. He also used a wireless signal to ring a bell at a distance and to fire a gun remotely. India's first wireless station was established just 3 years later in 1902. This was installed at Sandheads on Saugur Island out in the Bay of Bengal. The original call sign for this station was ROS, though when regular international call signs were mandated worldwide, this call was amended to VWS. During this same era, another wireless station was installed in the area, though this time much closer to Calcutta itself. The station was licensed under the call sign VWC, and it was installed a little northeast of the city itself. When radio replaced wireless, a new location was chosen just north of Calcutta. Station VWC is still in use today, around a century after its original installation, and it was noted a few years ago with time signals for which QSL cards were issued. Well, that's as far as we go in the Calcutta story today, but in 2 weeks' time, we plan to present the story of early experimental radio broadcasting. You're listening to Wavescan from Adventist World Radio. In every DX program on the air, and in all Radio DX magazines, and in the identification announcements from shortwave stations, the technical word kilohertz is used. So today we ask the question, what is a kilohertz? With the answer, here again is Ray Robinson.
In every DX program on the air, in all Radio DX magazines, and in the identification announcements from shortwave stations, the technical word kilohertz is used. So we ask the question, what is a kilohertz? In the early days of experimental wireless development, it was common practice to calibrate electromagnetic waves by measuring the distance from one crest to the next crest in much the same way as you might measure the waves of the ocean from one crest to the next. This distance is called the wavelength, and because many of the prominent early experimenters were European, it came to be measured electrically in meters. Thus you'll find the dials of most of the very old radio receivers marked in meters. In the medium wave broadcast band, one station in particular might be on the air, for example, on a wavelength of 200 meters, and another on 300 meters. On shortwave, one station could be shown as 30.99 meters, and another on 30.96 meters. But there's another way of calibrating a radio signal. Instead of measuring the distance between crests, or length of complete wave cycles, you can count how many of those complete cycles pass a fixed point in 1 second. This is known as the frequency. The existence of electromagnetic waves was first demonstrated by German physicist Heinrich Hertz, and in 1930 the International Electrotechnical Commission, or IEC, established the unit of frequency of 1 cycle per second as being 1 Hertz in his honour. This is abbreviated with a capital H and a small z. Following standard metric usage, a frequency of 1,000 cycles per second, or 1,000 Hertz, is thus equal to 1 kilohertz. As time went by, it was discovered that measuring a radio signal by its frequency in kilohertz was more accurate and easier to express than its wavelength in meters. In addition, as the broadcast bands became more crowded, it was decided by international convention to adopt on medium wave a 10 kHz separation between channels in the Western Hemisphere and a 9 kHz separation in the rest of the world, including long wave in Europe. On shortwave, where signals have narrower bandwidths, a 5 kHz separation between channels was adopted globally. In spite of this, however, radio stations in Europe continued to announce their spot on the medium wave or long wave dial in meters, right up until June 1984. During that month they switched to using kilohertz instead, like most other regions had already done. There's an inverse relationship between meters and kilohertz of 1 to 300,000. You can divide the wavelength in meters, or the frequency in kilohertz, into 300,000 and obtain the reciprocal. As an example, for a shortwave station such as WWV, which broadcasts on 10,000 kilohertz, you can divide 10,000 into 300,000 and see that its wavelength is 30 meters, just above the 31 meter broadcast band. Decades ago, when I lived in the London area, the BBC had a 150 kilowatt medium wave transmitter there on 330 meters, carrying Radio 4. Today, that same transmitter now carries Radio 5 Live. You can divide 330 into 300,000 and see that the frequency being used is 909 kilohertz. Sometimes, instead of kilohertz, you might find a radio station channel designated in megahertz. Long-wave and medium-wave stations always use kilohertz, and VHF FM stations always use megahertz. When you hear that a station is on 89.9 FM, the frequency being used is actually 89.9 megahertz. But on the shortwave bands between the medium-wave and FM bands, both kilohertz and megahertz are used. To convert back and forth between kilohertz and megahertz, all you need to do is move the decimal point by 3 places, remembering that 1000 kilohertz equals 1 megahertz. Thus, for example, the shortwave channel 30.99 meters can be expressed as either 9680 kilohertz or 9.68 megahertz. The standard abbreviations for these 3 radio terms are expressed in this way. Meters is written as a small m, kilohertz is abbreviated KHZ, spelt with a small k, capital H and a small z, and megahertz is abbreviated MHZ, spelt with a capital M, a capital H and a small z.
Well, thank you very much, Ray. And let me just take this opportunity to mention once again a meeting coming up here in North America for those of you who are in the eastern U.S. particularly, and that is the annual meeting of the National Association of Shortwave Broadcasters, the NASB. It's going to take place this year, May 15th and 16th, at the IBB Greenville Broadcasting Station. That is the Voice of America transmitting station in Greenville, North Carolina. That's just a ways east of Raleigh. It is going to be held at the relay station itself. You'll have a chance to tour the relay station and to hear various talks and presentations about all kinds of subjects involving shortwave broadcasting and shortwave listening. This is a meeting for both shortwave broadcasters, but also for shortwave listeners. Listeners are invited, and they attend every year, and we are very glad to have them. We will be there. Wavescan will be there. And we'll be looking forward to meeting some of you there. If you're able to make it, you can find more information on the NASB website, which is www.shortwave.org. That's www.shortwave.org, and then click on Annual Meeting. There you'll find all of the basic information, as well as an online registration form. It is completely free of charge. It even includes some of your meals. Of course, you have to pay your own travel expenses to get there and stay there, but the meeting itself is free of charge and open to anyone interested in shortwave radio. Again, www.shortwave.org, and then click on Annual Meeting. Thanks for listening to Wavescan, the International DX program from Adventist World Radio, researched and written in Indianapolis by Dr. Adrian Peterson. We end today with some music from Modest Mussorgsky and The Great Gate at Kiev from his Pictures at an Exhibition, performed by the Berlin Radio Symphony Orchestra. Next week in Wavescan, the BBC Indian Ocean Relay Station Seychelles, The End of an Era, and Australian DX Report. If you'd like to write to us with your reception reports, you can send them to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana 46229, USA. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana 46229, USA. You can also email us at wavescan@awr.org. That's wavescan@awr.org. And of course, we have QSL cards available for your reception reports. Until next week, then, I'm Jeff White at shortwave station WRMI at our studio in Miami today. Take care and good listening, everyone.